Very much.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So I'm Stevenson-Dodd. I'm going to talk to you today about trust, about transparency, and about impact measurement. And just think a moment, when you meet people in our sector, how often do they say to you, how big is your organisation? And what they mean is, what's your turnover? How many staff do you appoint? And these are seen as markers of success. But actually, nobody really says to you, how impactful is your organisation? Nobody says, how many lives do you change? And that is actually why we're all here. In this sector, we're all here to make a change in people's lives. And that is what we should be valuing. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. So my background, as Mark said, I was Chief Executive of Street League for 8.5 years, up until about 3 weeks ago. So I'm just making that adjustment. Street League is a sport for employment organisation. So they use sport to get young people into jobs, work in 14 cities, 39 local communities, all over the country with 16 to 25-year-olds, mostly in disadvantaged communities. And we did lots of interesting things with impact, which I'll talk about in a moment, but we won the Third Sector Impact Award, the Annual Report Award and the Social Impact Award for Social Enterprise UK for our work. And then 3 weeks ago, I set up Trust Impact as a consultancy to try and help others do what we've done at Street League and make that journey into being more impact-led. So, why is impact important? Well, I think there's a number of things going on for us in our sector, but the thing that really drove me towards making a change around this was the sort of big statements that you see in lots of people's annual reports that are, I think, quite misleading. So things like we helped more than 116,000 young people, we worked with, we supported, we transformed their lives. What do these statements actually mean? What does helps actually mean? And I think all of this was epitomised by Kids Company, who were claiming to work with 36,000 young people every year. And in reality, when they looked at the files, it was 2,000. Why didn't they just talk about 2,000 lives that they were working with? Why did they feel the need to amplify that up to 36,000, which clearly wasn't true? I think there's a big problem there with overclaiming. I've always loved this quote from Warren Buffett: only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. And I think we're in a situation now where the tide is going out. The money is leaving the sector rapidly, particularly public sector funding. And I think those organisations that are overclaiming what they're doing on impact are starting to feel more exposed. So there's a need to make the change. But primarily, this is all about trust. And trust is so important. From my experience at Street League, this is the word that's come up again and again for people: sincerity and trust. Actually, by being more open and being more honest, you build trust. And we have a huge problem with trust in the sector. Charity used to be a byword for trust, and now it's not. And if you look at this is a couple of years ago, the sort of people in society that people trust. Charity chief execs, only 46% of people trust charity chief executives. Nurses are at 93% trust. Charity chief executives should be up there at 93%. We should be up with nurses, and yet we're not. So why are people not trusting us? And this is so important, I think, in terms of the next generation. Millennials are very much looking for transparency, for openness in the organisations they want to support. But also, I think it's a dilemma for us as leaders in the charity sector of social enterprises that we must really respond to this. And I think there are a number of ways to do it, but for me, impact and openness and transparency are really important. So let me tell you a little bit about Street League's journey, because it has been a journey and it takes a while. And that's really important to understand. So back in 2010, when I joined, we were measuring participation, how many young people came and played football with our organisation. We would then sample 100 young people every year. We'd send out this sort of long survey. And the results of that would inform the impact that we talked about. So we'd sort of ask them, have you given up smoking while you're at Street League? And 20 of the 100 did. So therefore, 20% of all of our young people give up smoking when they're at Street League. 30 got jobs. Therefore, Street League got 30% of our young people going to jobs. And it just wasn't true. You could not justify it on the basis of 100 people sampled. So I was really quite concerned about this. So we tried to make this move then to measuring outcomes. And for me, that was work, education, or training. And that took us about 3 years. And it's because a lot of the frontline staff were saying to me, look, we're amazing youth workers. And they were. They're absolutely incredible. Why do you need to measure whether a young person gets a job? We're doing very good work with these young people. You don't need to measure the outcomes. But we started to say to them, it's only the outcomes that matter. It's only that thing that what you're doing is brilliant, but that is towards a purpose. And that change took a long time to sort of get people to really think about how do you measure whether you're actually doing that good stuff for young people. And it helped us focus the organisation as well. But then we realised you could actually manipulate that quite easily. So you could meet a young person one day. Maybe they don't even need Street League's help. Maybe they just, they're quite happy from a good environment. They don't actually need the charity service. We get them into a job and they walk out of it the next day. And we've ticked our box and we've said, yes, we've achieved an outcome. And we realised that wasn't happening all the time, but it could happen. So what we needed to do is move towards impact, understanding where young people were coming from, their journey through Street League, and did they stay in a job for more than 6 months. So we started to measure things like the postcode that they lived in. We measured their highest educational attainment to date when they joined us. We measured what barriers they faced, whether they were a young carer or they had drug issues or they were homeless. So we really built up an understanding of who they were. We went to complete 100% data set. So every young person tracked through the program. Did they drop out of the program? Did they complete the program? Where did they go to? What outcome? And most importantly, did they stay in it for 6 months? Because for us, a sustained 6 months job outcome means the young person has got into the habit of work. They've changed their life. They want to work. They're going to go forward and do that. And that was a big, big change for Street League. And then the latter stage really was learning from the data we had. So we're collecting all this data. It's absolutely incredible. But every year we just put that aside and then collect a load more data. And we realized you needed to sort of really understand and interpret the data. Data is incredible for being able to tell you stuff that you don't already know. So, for example, when we were just measuring outcomes, one of our cities used to achieve their outcome target every year by December. So we start the year in April. By December, they'd done it. Everybody was amazed, totally celebrated. Then when we looked at the data, what we found was there were a load of young people in that city who were not getting a destination. So they're coming through the program and not getting any outcome. And it was just about sheer volume of numbers. So the outcomes were great, but if you looked at it in a different way, it wasn't successful. There were a lot of young people not getting success. So that being able to cut the data and look at it in different ways really helped Street League understand what we were good at and what we weren't good at. So then in 2016, we decided to do something, I think we might say quite brave. And we sort of talked about this internally for a while. We've been very transparent internally, looking at what we didn't do well as what we did do well. And so I went to the board when we came to do the annual report and I said, I've got this brilliant idea. Why don't we talk about up front, rather than burying it in the report, the young people that we weren't able to help during the year. So 109 young people came to Street League that year, and for whatever reason, we could not help them get an outcome. Why don't we put that up front and then talk about our successes? So half the board were like, that's the craziest idea you've ever had. Why would you ever talk about failure? The other half of the board was saying, actually, this is really interesting. When you read this report, you believe the rest of it because you've already read the failure stuff at the front. Now, the first iteration of this was last year. We failed to help 109 young people. And some of the board members said, this feels a bit strong. It feels like, failure is a big word. And I think they were right. So we changed it to we were not able to help. I think that was right at the time. I felt a bit more confident about talking about failure since then. But seeing as this was quite a new thing. And then we went all out. So I wrote an article for The Guardian. We thought, let's just push this out there and see what happens. And I'm really pleased to say it was really well received. So talking about these 109 young people, before we talked about the 1,281 that we were able to help. And just to be totally clear, that was the best year Street League had ever had. So I felt really confident, being able to do this, thinking, yeah, we're talking about these 109, but it was still a risk. I'm really pleased that it was received well. We also talked about 48 outcomes that we rejected, and we rejected them because they didn't have enough evidence with them. So 48 young people that year got a job, but we didn't have the evidence to prove it, so we rejected the outcomes. We wanted to be very, very transparent about where we were. We also came up with these 3 golden rules, which we wanted to share with the rest of the sector. This was back in 2016. So the first was that we'll never overclaim what we do. And that is a kind of response to the kids company, 36,000 young people. Secondly, that all percentages should be backed up by real numbers. So if I said we were 75% successful, that's either 75 out of 100 or 7,500 out of 10,000. You've got no idea what it is, just from the percentage. But with the numbers with it, you understand the size. So some people have said to me, we're an employment organisation, we're 100% successful. Okay. And then you talk to them and they're working with 10 people. You think, that's great. I'd be 100% successful if I worked with 10 people. Give us the actual numbers and we can see where you are. And then all our outcomes are backed by auditable evidence. So for Street League, if a young person gets a job, they have a photocopy of the first month's pay slip or an offer letter from the employer. There's evidence that's there to prove that the outcome actually exists. And that's actually proved to be the most tricky one, the third one, because it requires you to build that in to the organisation's standards. But this also threw up some really interesting points for me. And this was about how charities talk about success. Should we ever be 100% successful? I don't think we should ever try and achieve that, because by being 100% successful, you're either working with the easiest people, perhaps the wrong people to be working with, or you have miracle workers in your team. Now, I know the staff team at Street League are absolutely incredible, but they're not miracle workers. So for me, taking a risk with people is the most essential part of this. There's young people who come to Street League who we know probably won't get a job, but we've got to give them a chance and try. And some of those young people get through. And I think that risk-taking is important. But then it begs the question, what percentage of success are you happy with? 80% success, 50% success, 20% success? And this is a new sort of conversation that you need to have within the organisation. Where do you feel comfortable in terms of how the organisation is performing? And then the year after, 2017, we linked our internal database to our website, and we created what we thought was still think is the first online impact dashboard that's pretty much in real time. So rather than having to wait up to 18 months to find out what's going on at Street League from our annual report, you can see it now month by month on a rolling 12-month basis. So it always looks back at the previous 12 months, and it talks about the number of young people started, how many young people disengaged, you can see this along the top, how many young people progressed into work, education or training, and then how many sustained work, so just the job outcome. And there's our theory of change underneath, so you can see the sort of progress of young people. You can see this live right now, streetleague.co.uk/impact. It's always up there, and it's updated once a month. Then it goes into more detail as you can scroll through. There's 8 slides. So of the young people that started, you've got the BAME participation rate, female participation rate, and you can see how that changes. You can filter this by England, Scotland, female, male, age groups, and you can see how Street League is performing. And then the barriers that the young people report when they come to us. And again, you can filter all of that, so you can get an idea of who is starting with Street League at any time on a rolling 12-month basis. This is how many young people disengaged. And then it's kind of why they disengaged. So the vast majority there, so over 75%, we were unable to contact. But we wanted to show that, because young people, when they leave the course, these are the young people you really need to speak to. I don't know if anybody's read Black Box Thinking. There's a lovely story in there about the Spitfires, coming back, and they were all shot through the wings. So the engineers were saying, well, let's strengthen the wings. And then somebody said, it's actually the ones that aren't coming back that you really want to be worried about. They're the ones that were shot through the fuselage. So let's strengthen the fuselage. And that for me is the most important thing. It's that missing data, the stuff that you're not hearing. Those young people, that over 75% who walked out of Street League, who would not tell us why they left. That's what we've got to try and address. And you can see other things like unstable personal life, moved out of region, some went to prison, but we try and record that and learn from it. And then you can filter all these by what barriers those young people face. So you can see if they left, what barriers were they facing. Again, filter those by England, Scotland, male and female. This is progression into outcomes. So employment, education, external training, internal training, and employment with training. And again, you can sort of see the top employment sectors that our young people are going into. We wanted to sort of display the types of jobs that young people were getting from going through Street League. So the big assumption with Street League being sport, that everybody goes into sport jobs, but it's not the case. We work with a range of employers to help young people get jobs. But this is my favourite slide. This is the one at the end. This shows the indices of multiple deprivation. And this is all of our young people, where they live. So you can see the vast majority on the left there live in the most deprived areas. And that to me is straight away an indication that we are working in the right areas. If that graph peaked in the middle, I'd be a little bit more concerned, I think, but I was always wanting to see that peaking at the left. The dark blue line is the number of participants, the light blue line is the number of outcomes, and the orange line is the number of sustained outcomes. And what you can see as well is there's generally a pattern, regardless of where you live, you will get an outcome pretty much the same, and you will sustain pretty much the same. So again, if the orange and light blue lines were lower in certain areas, you'd be concerned. But you can see that visually, really clearly, and most importantly, everybody in the organisation can see it. So what we get now is conversations about, oh, okay, well, you know, how did you manage to do that? Or were you working with the right people? And it's opened up like lots of conversations. Our internal version of this is much more complicated, so you can drill right down into team level, and you can really see what's going on in an individual team. But it opens up that transparent impact questions amongst colleagues, rather than, you know, formerly as me as chief exec saying, hang on, what's going on here? People are having these conversations because of the openness. So what are others doing? I'm really pleased to say that we're starting to now see some of this stuff coming out in the sector. So Click Sargent, in their impact report last year, they talked about all the things they didn't get right in a page 21, hands up, we're not perfect. I thought this was a really good move by Click Sargent, and because they were, you know, several times bigger than Street League, this got them some really good attention. But it's very honest sort of report on what they didn't get right in the year, and you know, I hope then they'll go further from this, encouraged by the reception they got. Catch 22 just released this in January, the same. So what we learned, and both Naomi and Chris, the chief exec, talking about all the things that they learned from the year. And again, you think sometimes these things get buried in annual reports, but this is a section in its own right. I think this is really, really great to see. And then there was the F word conference, the failure word. This was back in October last year, and it was aimed at the sports sector, but it was all about talking about failure. What have you learned from failure? What have you learned? Because this is the most important thing, I think, understanding things and being able to move forward from your learning, but sharing that with others so we don't all make the same mistakes, and we can learn what best practice is. And that was a great day. But you're starting to see quite a lot of these things now coming together, and I just encourage more people to try and do this, which is why I left Street League 3 weeks ago to set up Trust Impact, with a view to try and help chief executives make that move from seeing impact as being really quite complicated. And I think a lot of the time what you find in organisations is the impact person is, you know, quite a junior person in the organisation. What they turn out is quite academic, and you know, making that link between how do you communicate that with stakeholders and in a clear and transparent way, and you know, how does it inform strategy? I think that's what I've been really, really interested. So pleased to say that the response so far has been really good. But I'm trying to sort of take that pragmatic view to help others do this. So I was going to stop there for a moment and ask if you had any questions.